Breaking tonight, a pitched battle by the White House to continue the good feeling from Tuesday's big speech, while Democrats attempt to douse the momentum by undoing the Attorney General after new Russia revelations. I'm Martha MacCallum, and it is day 42 of the first 100. While the Sessions controversy had some critics a bit giddy with hopes of taking down another cabinet member, the president made a dramatic Marine One landing on the deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford this afternoon, attempting to keep his White House on message.
Our Navy is now the smallest it's been since, believe it or not, World War I. Don't worry. Going to soon be the largest it's been. Don't worry.
Still news that AG Sessions had met with the same Russian diplomat that eventually took down Michael Flynn dominated the day, and at 4 p.m., Sessions faced reporters.
I have now decided to recuse myself from any existing or future investigations of any matter relating in any way to the campaigns for President of the United States. This announcement should not be interpreted as confirmation of the existence of any investigation or suggestive of the scope of any such investigation.
That statement, no doubt forced by the buzz which went on all day, and through it all, President Trump defended his Attorney General.
Mr. President, do you still have confidence in the Attorney General? Total. Do you think he should have spoken truthfully about whether he had spoken to the ambassador?
He probably did.
For the good of the country, Attorney General Sessions should resign.
People who are choosing to play partisan politics with this should be ashamed of themselves.
The top cop in our country lied under oath. He has proved that he is unqualified and unfit.
I think that's ridiculous. Our good friends on the other side are hyperventilating over the election. Look, they expected to win and they lost.
So tonight, we talked to Congressman Trey Gowdy, former chairman of the House Select Committee on Benghazi and current member of the House Intelligence Committee, which is investigating the alleged Russian interference. Plus, Richard Painter is a former Chief Bush White House ethics lawyer who is calling on Senator Sessions to resign. And world-renowned constitutional scholar and lawyer Jonathan Turley, all here. But first, we begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, who questioned the Attorney General today. Catherine.
Thank you, Martha. The Attorney General told reporters today that he was already considering recusal when a Washington Post story late last night seemed to accelerate the timeline.
On Monday of this week, we set a meeting with an eye to a final decision on this question, and my staff recommended recusal. They said that since I had involvement with the campaign, I should not be involved in any campaign investigation.
The Attorney General called allegations that he acted as an intermediary between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence as false and baseless. Attorney General Sessions said he will clarify his confirmation testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee. There, he said he was caught off guard by Democrat Al Franken's question about a media report concerning allegations the Russians had a damaging dossier on then-candidate Trump. Attorney General Sessions said he correctly stated that he had no contact of a political nature with the Russians, but will now explain his meetings with the Russian ambassador. On the September meeting with that ambassador, Attorney General Sessions said the request came out of the blue to meet with him, and to this day he does not understand the motive.
With hindsight, do you believe that this is a coincidence that the Russians asked you for a meeting, or do you believe you were targeted?
I don't recall and don't have a sense of any connection whatsoever. I can't speak for what the Russian ambassador may have had in his mind.
Also, based on that news conference today, the Attorney General will no longer get briefed on the Russia investigation, and he will no longer have decision-making authority. That will fall to his deputy, and the confirmation on that position is next week, Martha.
All right, Catherine, thank you. So here now, Congressman Trey Gowdy, member of the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. Congressman, welcome. Good to have you here tonight.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So you heard Senator Sessions' recusal today and watched him answer the questions. What questions do you have for him remaining?
For him, probably not any, because I'm not a criminal investigator, so to the extent people are talking about false statements before Congress, I wouldn't have any. That was my old job. My new job is to provide oversight over investigations after they happen, which is why we met with Jim Comey this morning. But, you know, Attorney General Sessions incorrectly answered a question. That happens almost every day in Congress, and there aren't perjury referrals. People do make mistakes. I was struck listening to the intro, Martha, that it could not have been a campaign-related conversation if it took place on Capitol Hill. I don't know where the meeting with the Russian ambassador took place, but if it took place at the Capitol,
in his office with 2 of his aides.
Okay, well then you can't discuss politics, presidential or otherwise. That is yet a separate issue. So the Jeff Sessions I know has always been a rule follower. I don't think he's going to be talking about campaign-related matters on Capitol grounds. And if he said he forgot about it, he would be about the 1,000,000th person who actually forgot about a fact.
But here's why I think, the whole thing is raising questions. And after I watched the news conference today, some of those questions arose. It's the middle of the campaign. It's September. There's already all this discussion about hacking from Russia that surfaced during the DNC in the summer. So he says that the Russian ambassador called out of the blue and said, I'd like to come in and talk with you. And he said yes. So just a few short months later in January, he describes a somewhat uncomfortable conversation. And he said he brought up things about the Ukraine that, seemed to make the ambassador a little uncomfortable with his take on that idea. And then in January, he doesn't remember that conversation happening. And then after that, his aides don't say to him, hey, after the testimony, we did have that meeting, remember? And there's no follow-up to the committee based on that recollection?
Well, it's up to him. He's the one that gave the testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee. It's up to him to clarify it. I'm just telling you, having been there for 6 years, almost every witness gets some fact incorrect. That is not tantamount to perjury. I'm not prejudging this. The FBI is welcome to look at it. If the Senate feels that strongly about it, they can send a referral to the FBI. But simply making a factual error is not tantamount to perjury.
All right, so the investigation is ongoing. You met with the FBI director this morning. I watched Congressman Schiff come out and speak about that earlier today. He said that, the FBI has only given us a fraction of what they know here. He seemed very rattled that they're not sharing enough about whether or not there was collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians. That is the main question. What's your takeaway? What are you able to share about that?
I was in the same room for the same morning, and it is exactly the opposite. I have never heard a federal law enforcement agent give with that degree of particularity and detail an update on an inquiry. And as you may recall, I was a federal prosecutor for 6 years, so I have talked to lots of FBI agents. He went so far beyond what any other administration official has ever done, whether it's Eric Holder, Loretta Lynch, or his predecessor, Robert Mueller. They never gave us this level of detail and specificity. He bent over backwards, not just the DNC. Martha, I want to investigate all aspects of Russia, not just Podesta's email, everything. Hacking our infrastructure, attempts to hack the RNC, whatever they did, look at it. But Congress does not run parallel criminal investigations with the FBI. We're not equipped to do it. We're not supposed to do it. Jim Comey did more today to update us than I have ever had done in the 6 years I have been there. And for Adam to treat it that way, that dismissively, clearly he and I were in 2 separate rooms this morning.
Very interesting. Just last question. John Brennan and Mr. Clapper both said that after the investigation, they were not able to see any evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, that they were trying to bring down Hillary Clinton's candidacy. Is there any new information that you got from Mr. Comey on that today?
Well, if I did get new information, despite how adeptly you asked that question, I would not be able to share it given the nature of our hearing. But I will tell you this, to the extent people are relying on media reports, whether it's the New York Times or the Washington Post, upon which to base their factual assertions, I would tell them to be very, very careful. I'm not going to say any more than that, other than the person leading the investigation on behalf of the United States government, the head of the FBI, listen to what he has to say. Don't listen to anonymous sources who leak classified information, which, oh, by the way, is also against the law. Between Jim Comey and a reporter from the New York Times, give me Jim Comey.
Thank you very much, Congressman Gowdy. Always good to see you, sir. So a range of reaction across the political spectrum to the news of Attorney General Sessions today. Here now, Professor Jonathan Turley, constitutional scholar who teaches at the George Washington University Law School, and Professor Richard Painter, former chief ethics lawyer for the Bush White House, who tweeted this today: misleading the Senate in sworn testimony about one's own contacts with the Russians is a good way to go to jail. Let me start with you, Richard Painter. Do you still feel that way after what we saw unfold today?
Well, yes, I feel very strongly about the real problem, which is Russia's conduct over many decades and our inability to deal with it. Russia has tried to subvert Western democracies since the 1920s here in the United States and in Europe. It's going on in France right now. And if we're going to deal with this problem, we need to be honest with each other about what we know about what the Russians are doing and when we're meeting with the Russians. And when Senator Sessions, in his confirmation hearing, said that he had had no contact with the Russians, that is what he said, and that was just wrong. He had these meetings with the Russian ambassador. I'm very concerned about that. I'm not going to prejudge whether Senator Sessions committed perjury. What I'm interested in is, do we have an Attorney General and other officials in our government who are willing to be honest with each other in communicating about this very serious threat to our democracy coming from Russia?
All right, I want to get Jonathan Turley's reaction, but first I want to play a bit of what Senator Sessions said today about the meeting.
We talked about a little bit about terrorism, as I recall, and somehow the subject of the Ukraine came up. I had the Ukrainian ambassador in my office the day before, and to listen to him, nothing that Russia had done nothing that was wrong in any area, and everybody else was wrong with regard to the Ukraine. It got to be a little bit of a testy conversation at that point. It wrapped up. He said something about inviting me to have lunch. I did not accept that, and that never occurred.
Jonathan Turley, your reaction.
Well, I think that the Attorney General was correct to recuse himself. He was also correct in issuing a letter of clarification. As I've said before, I thought that there should have been a recusal early. You know, my only complaint on that point is the administration sometimes seems 3 beats behind, sort of like your uncle who keeps on dancing after the music stops at weddings. They need to pick up their rhythm on something like this. There should have been an earlier recusal. They could have avoided much of this. But I still don't see where the crime is here. I looked at the testimony. I respect what Mr. Painter says. There's no question that the answer was not complete. The question was broader. But the question was not a model of clarity. It was a long question that involved a just recently released CNN story. Should he have been a little more broad in his answer? Absolutely. But I'm still not convinced that there's a compelling or even cognizable case for perjury here. He's recused himself. That's the right thing he did. He did the right thing to do. He did it a bit belatedly because he waited for this meeting.
Richard, why do you think there is a? Do you believe there is a case for perjury, as you stated in your tweet message this morning? Do you still believe that?
What I said is that not telling the truth about your dealing with the Russians is a good way to end up in jail, and you can, and people have gone to jail for that, whether it's Alger Hiss or other people. I'm not going to prejudge this case, but I don't think he's fit to be Attorney General if he can't communicate honestly with his colleagues in the Senate about a meeting with a Russian ambassador. That's not a fact you just forget conveniently. Well, this is a very, very serious situation.
Final thought, Jonathan Turley, then we got to go.
Well, I think we need to recognize he answered the more difficult and more poignant question, that is campaign discussions with the Russians. That was the one that he did not evade, and he did answer it, and it does appear to be truthful.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen. Good to have you both here tonight. So tonight at 9 o'clock, right here on Fox, Tucker Carlson will speak exclusively in his one-on-one interview with Attorney General Jeff Sessions about today's big announcement that he's recusing himself from the investigations into the Trump campaign and the Russians. That is tonight, 9 o'clock. Tucker Carlson tonight. We don't want to miss that. It's going to be a great interview, no doubt. So more tonight on the top story. Attorney General Sessions' recusal reminded us of a moment, a pretty big one, As Dems call for Sessions to resign, Mercedes Schlapp and Juan Williams debate straight ahead. Plus, President Trump donned his commander-in-chief hat today and doubled down on his promise to rebuild the United States military. Charlie Hurt and Julie Roginski join us coming up.
I will always support you and your mission. I will never, ever let you down.
More now on our top story and the ongoing political fallout after all-day demands for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' recusal. Some are still calling for him to resign. On the Democrat side, it all ended with the Attorney General doing just that, recusing, not resigning, but not before Democrats came out in full force, ordering for him to step down. Watch some of this.
Beyond the shadow of a doubt that Attorney General Sessions cannot possibly lead an investigation into Russian interference in our elections or come anywhere near it.
This is pretty suspicious. I certainly would have said you need to recuse yourself.
This Congress impeached a president for something so far less.
I have studied the rules and considered their comments and evaluation. I believe those recommendations are right and just. Therefore, I have recused myself.
Democrats are calling this a victory, but critics are pointing out that some of these same politicians had very different reactions when Attorney General Loretta Lynch was caught having a very questionable meeting with President Bill Clinton in the middle of his wife's email probe. So joining me now, Mercedes Schlapp, Republican strategist, and Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. Both are Fox News contributors. Welcome to both of you. So, you know, it always seems when the shoe's on the other foot, the level of outrage is ramped up, you know, with an equal and opposite reaction. Juan, I want to just start by showing Senator Schumer back on June 30th with regard to Loretta Lynch. We'll play him then and now. Watch.
She has said nothing was discussed related to the investigation. So you have two choices, to say this didn't matter or she's lying. I think it didn't matter. There cannot be even the scintilla of doubt about the impartiality and fairness of the Attorney General, the top law enforcement official of the land. It's clear Attorney General Sessions does not meet that test. Attorney General Sessions should resign.
Juan, why such a different story?
Well, I mean, clearly Loretta Lynch didn't deny that she had a meeting at the time with Bill Clinton and it wasn't planned, but I think the context is somewhat different, but your point is well taken, that this has become such a partisan fray. I think that the Attorney General today did a big favor to President Trump. I think he added credibility to whatever investigation is now done in the way that Loretta Lynch removed herself, and that's still a big controversial item, and allowed the FBI Director Jim Comey to make a decision about going forward on prosecution was totally wild, because normally the FBI Director has nothing to do with it. Now you're in a situation where you know, the Attorney General said, look, I'm going to be formal about this and recuse myself. And I think that was the right move. He said it was based on the advice of his top aides. And I think it was the right move because it will help President Trump as this investigation goes forward.
Well, they said they were considering this move to recuse among his staff before this whole story broke last night. Yeah. And, you know, the context of it, Mercedes, everything is seen in a political context these days, right? So you've got this big Tuesday night speech. Right. President Trump is all across the newspapers and every internet site, every news site, that it's a big win for him, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, as he's, you know, heading out to Newport News to land on the aircraft carrier, this is the meat of every single moment on cable news and elsewhere today. What do you make of all that?
Well, it was shocking news, quite frankly, but I think what is disturbing is the fact that the Democrats have decided that they're going to jump the gun. They are so eager to find their next target, and their next target in this case is obviously Senator Jeff Sessions, and they're focused on, they jumped right into that he's lying and that he should resign. Now that's just far stretched, it's ridiculous. When you actually listen to the exchange, and that's why I encourage the viewers to listen to the exchange, it is very clear that Senator Al Franken asked the question in a way that was focused on the Trump surrogates and their continuous exchange with the Russian government. And he responded, Senator Sessions, based on that context as a surrogate. Now, obviously, we know that Senator Sessions, as do many of the senators and members of Congress, they meet with ambassadors in their official role as senator or congressman.
I think the thing that people take issue with is the fact that he didn't correct it. You know, that he said there are 2 staff members in the office with him during this discussion with the Russian ambassador. You know, the fact that nobody said, we got to get out in front of this. But you remember,
it would have been
at that
a smarter
moment,
move.
the ambassador was the same person who had discussions with Mike Flynn, and, you know, maybe they just thought if they kept their head down for a while, they wouldn't have to discuss this, but that's just not the way the world works anymore.
And I would also add, Martha, that Senator Leahy sent the now Attorney General Sessions a letter and asked him about contacts with the Russians, and the response from the Attorney General was no. I've had no contact.
It was no contact about the election. You know, there's a lot of parsing of words going on here. Both of you, thank you very much. I think people, you know, are kind of up to here with a lot of this stuff. So we'll move on. Thank you for being here. It's good to see you both. So breaking tonight, new reports of massive budget cuts at the Environmental Protection Agency. The president asked for these cuts, and he will get them at non-security-based agencies. Charles Hurt and Julie Roginski weigh in next. And is the Secretary of State about to blow up the Iran deal that President Trump hates so much? Our own General Jack Keane joins us next with his take on that. Stick around. Rebuilding our military, the Commander-in-Chief traveled to Newport News, Virginia for a visit aboard America's newest aircraft carrier. He used the stop to promise more support for our armed forces.
I am calling for one of the largest defense spending increases in history. Our military requires sustained, stable funding to meet the growing needs placed in our defense. Our Navy is now the smallest it's been since, believe it or not, World War I. Don't worry. Going to soon be the largest it's been. We also need more aircraft, modernized capabilities, and greater force levels. American ships will sail the seas. American planes will soar the skies. American workers will build our fleets.
Here now, Charles Hurt, political columnist for the Washington Times, and Julie Roginski, Democratic analyst. Both are Fox News contributors. Good evening, you guys. Thank you very much for being here. This is what today was supposed to be all about from the White House perspective. Of course, a lot of it was drowned out by the Jeff Sessions news, but, you know, he really does want to increase the budget here, Charlie, and he's also worked pretty hard to get some of those contracts lowered with Lockheed and Boeing and all of that, those negotiations that he's been making. How's he doing?
Yeah, well, you know, love him or hate him, this is exactly what he ran his campaign on, and it's exactly what he won the campaign on. And as you mentioned, you know, we've never seen a commander-in-chief come in and sort of knock heads on individual programs like the F-35 jet strike fighter and the Air Force One replacement. You know, actually getting real savings out of those things by negotiating. And of course, you know, Donald Trump likes to sort of present himself as the great negotiator, and apparently he's going to sort of get under the hood of every negotiation there is out there. But, you know, the military is you know, we're at the it's been degraded to a point like we've never seen in decades, and this is exactly what he said he would do.
He made it clear out there today, Julie, that he wants to turn that around, but while doing cost cutting at the same time. He's a businessman, and that's the approach that he takes to these things. And as Charlie said, you know, most people who become president have spent their lives in government, so they don't have any problem with escalating costs time and time again. This individual works very differently.
Well, look, you know, there is something to be said for the fact that sequestration was a pretty devastating thing, not just for the defense budget, but across the board. I will say you have a letter signed by over 100 generals begging him and saying to him that a national security crisis would ensue, in so many words, if he were to cut the budget as he wants to cut it by a third at places like the State Department. So it's not just about building more ships or building more planes or giving the budget hike to the Defense Department. It's also about ensuring that our diplomatic corps is not drastically cut with the meat axe.
Wasn't there a banner on the ship today? Charlie, you pointed this out. What did it say?
100 tons of diplomacy. And indeed, the nice thing about having 12 aircraft carriers is that you don't always have to use them. Just having them kind of sets the tone.
Yeah, that's the argument he's making, Julie.
The problem is you have people like General Mattis and others who are saying if you cut the diplomatic corps and you cut the diplomatic budget, you're forcing them to buy more bullets. And ultimately, we don't want to go to war. I mean, a great part of avoiding war is clearly diplomacy in the State Department. And what you're doing by shredding their budget.
The peace through strength.
Well, you know, I think you have 100. He should listen to his own generals and to previous generals. When you have 100 generals saying that.
I hear you. Want to get your thought on the EPA though, because he said we're going to slash 20%, 25% from all of these budgets. We're going to cut billions from these agencies, and you're going to cut your head count as well at them. There is a vast bureaucracy. Anybody who drives around downtown D.C. sees enormous buildings, and you think, what is everybody doing in there, Charlie?
Yeah, well, you know, any sort of, business leader that had to somehow get a grip on the massive sprawling bureaucracy that is the federal government would demand cuts across the board from everywhere. And the EPA, which is very much sort of morphed away from being, anti-pollution, environmental protection, and morphed into federal bureaucratic control of the most arcane things like ditches in people's backyards, that it cannot be immune from those cuts.
A huge regulatory arm. Julie, your thought?
Well, he won the state of Michigan. I would suggest you go to places like Flint, Michigan, and see the devastation of lead poisoning, which he's cutting the prevention of drastically.
The EPA did a good job of preventing that.
Well, actually, the EPA did not do a good job of preventing that. The problem is you have places like lead poisoning, obviously not just in Flint, but in your home state of New Jersey, Martha,
I think that
and
the
other
overall
places.
goal is that you can do good work and cut costs. It is possible.
Not when you take a meat
do it
axe.
across America all the time.
Not when you take a meat axe the way he's taking a quarter of the budget. I mean, that's a lot of clean water that he wants to prevent from getting dirty.
Let's see how it goes. We'll see how it goes. Well, Julie, thank you.
Thanks.
Charlie, thank you. Good to see you guys. So we're also getting reports tonight that our new Secretary of State is considering the Iran deal and possibly pulling out of that deal. It's a huge development. General Jack Keane weighs in with the details on that. Plus, could the answer to Chicago's crime involve one of the most controversial police programs in New York history? Gary McCarthy ran the Chicago PD for more than 4 years. He is our this evening. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is now calling for a full review of the controversial Iran deal. So what happens with that? It comes as he met today with the director of the Atomic Energy Agency on the future of the deal that was struck during the Obama administration and was the cornerstone of their State Department activity. President Trump has called that deal, as you saw on the campaign trail, a disaster. He has suggested that he, quote, might just tear it up as president. Here now, General Jack Keane, the chairman of the Institute for the Study of War and a Fox News military analyst. General, thank you for being here tonight. Always good to have you. What do you think of this move by Rex Tillerson?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary. This deal has been cloaked in secrecy, not only in the development of it, but once the deal was finalized, the American people were never given a full accounting of all the facts and details that are supporting this deal. So I think this is absolutely essential. There's been rumors running around the government for some time now that there's been violations of this deal. A good, solid review of the intelligence and the protocols and what do we have? Are the Iranians already violating this? And if so, why didn't the Obama administration come forward with that information? So absolutely essential he's doing this.
When you look at the supposed moves on the part of some former administration officials, perhaps, to try to save this deal, they don't want this Iran deal to go away, the people that worked so hard on it in the Obama administration. But if it does go away or if it's altered, it can be altered by our re-recognizing our allies on the Sunni side, right? Saudi Arabia, rebuilding those relationships will diminish that deal, won't it?
Well, what truly happened, this was the primary foreign policy initiative of the Obama administration for 8 years. And it trumped everything that they were doing in the Middle East at the expense of our Sunni Arabs, as you point out. We were accommodating the Iranians and putting their security at risk. Therefore, they are absolutely applauding the Trump administration's reach out to them as leaders saying, we are going to restore American leadership in the Middle East. We understand your number one threat is Iran, and Iran wants to dominate and control the Middle East. So this is all moving in the right direction.
All right. Some pretty strong words about North Korea from the Trump administration. What do you think they'll do? What do you think they should do?
Well, first of all, let's get all the options on the table. We have a belligerent power here that 3 presidents have failed to control the development of a nuclear arsenal, which is what they have now. And now they're intending to build an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the United States and delivering a warhead. That is an incredibly dangerous situation. And no amount of sanctions has been able to bring them to heel. Our 20 years of involvement with China, trying to get them to curb North Korea's behavior, has failed. So it is appropriate. Let's get it all on the table. What realistically are some of our options here with North Korea? Are we just going to continue to move in the same direction? And are we going to find ourselves at some point conducting a preemptory strike against an intercontinental ballistic missile? The problem with that is the option that North Korea has at that point would be to start a war with South Korea.
Not a lot of great options once they have that arsenal, which they already do. And you talk about preventing Iran, North Korea is way ahead in that game. I don't want to let you go without asking your thoughts on today's big story with regard to Sessions and the Russians. And the bottom line is, do you think there is anything to the suggestion that there was collusion? Did the Trump campaign try to convince the Russians to help them undermine Hillary Clinton's campaign by releasing those emails?
Well, we do know that the Russians likely did hack into the DNC and try to undermine their participation in the election. But I go back to what Director of National Intelligence Clapper said and the Director of the CIA, John Brennan, certainly no lovers of Donald Trump to be sure, and they said that there was no evidence to support any collusion on the part of Trump campaign officials and the Russians. And I don't think the basic facts have changed since then. Obviously, there's an investigation that's ongoing that will either confirm or deny those facts. But I suspect there's not more to the story than what we already know.
All right. General Jack Keane, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Good to see you, Martha.
So still ahead tonight, the real story of the 22-year-old in Mississippi who is now the newest poster child in the war with the president over immigration. Plus, with 400 shootings in Chicago just so far, murders in the city of Chicago so far this year, prompting a surprising new reaction from President Obama's former chief of staff, William Daley, who suggested that a stop-and-frisk program, long considered very controversial, is probably what Chicago needs to do to combat the violence. In moments, we will have reaction from Gary McCarthy, who spent more than 4 years as the superintendent of Chicago's police department, and from attorney Eric Guster. But first, we turn to national correspondent Matt Finn in Chicago tonight. Matt.
Martha, last month, 3 children under the age of 13 were shot and killed in this city. There's been nearly 100 gun deaths already this year. This violent crime is not slowing down as the cries to stop it are growing. And of course, there are many issues at hand. But one problem many people might not realize is the city's exclusive agreement with the ACLU that critics say has tied the hands of Chicago's police officers. In 2015, the ACLU did a study and concluded that CPD was grossly overstopping minorities and profiling blacks. So beginning in January of last year, Chicago started to require police officers fill out a lengthy report after every single stop. As a result, standard police stops in Chicago plummeted by over 80%. The same time, the city's murder rate exploded, begging the question if the ACLU agreement is in part to blame. Chicago's Fraternal Order of Police president tells us his officers are afraid to engage in basic stops because they fear the ACLU stats will label them racist, that the stats would somehow be used against them, and that standard police stops may never return to what they were. The ACLU, however, says the Chicago Police Department is to blame for the spike in crime, and it considers the drop in police stops a victory for minorities.
Most of us never saw this, never saw the experiences of black Chicagoans around stop and frisk, that it was harmful to the community.
It's the amount of above and beyond type of activity that officers were engaged in that we may not see at that same level ever again.
Martha, the Department of Justice just wrapped up an investigation into CPD that paints it as racist and in need of a training overhaul. It is yet to be seen how President Trump will enforce that report that was done under the Obama administration. Martha?
Thank you, Matt. All right, joining me now with reaction tonight is attorney Eric Guster. Eric, you listened to that report. What's your reaction?
I listened to that report and I think about the fairness in stop and frisk. Stop and frisk is not unlawful, but what, for example, NYPD did, they would stop people unlawfully. For example, over 80% of the stops when NYPD instituted that rule were black people, black and brown people, and that's very unfair. So we take this argument that stop and frisk works, which it does not, which the NYPD statistics clearly state that stop and frisk, when it was implemented improperly by the NYPD, for example, did not lower gun deaths, it did not lower gun seizures. But, however, we have to look at the opioid addiction.
Okay.
Look at it in the same vein, Martha. Should we stop white women and white men because opioids are killing them and start searching their cars illegally and going into their house illegally? That is something that we should consider as well if we want to do this.
In terms of the violence that's happening in Chicago, don't you want to protect those communities to the greatest extent that you can? You have more black victims by, black, in many cases, black perpetrators, and they're being told that they have to stop people equally, Caucasians, blacks, that they can't have a higher number of stops based on even the population in that neighborhood. That makes absolutely no sense. Do you concede that?
They have to make legal stops, and that is the issue. They have to make legal stops. For example, when the NYPD
do you
utilized
understand
this,
that what's happening is making people less safe, Eric? Wouldn't you prefer, if you lived in that neighborhood, for the police to stop more people than fewer people when people are dying at a much higher rate?
I want them to stop people legally, just like I want to stop the opioid addictions and the opioid deaths. So we need to start going to these people's houses and start doing that. That is the same argument that you're making. So you want them to stop and frisk
for opioids, but not...
No. I'm not saying that. I'm telling you that the same argument would go for opioid addiction. Oh, these people are killing themselves and overdosing. Should we illegally search their houses and illegally search their cars in order to stop those deaths? It's the same exact thing. But we have to make sure that we follow the law when it comes to stopping people.
What we have to make sure is that the law-abiding citizens who live in these communities are in a safer situation, because they're not right now. And we need to ramp up and make sure that they have what they need.
And 90% of those stops that were made on these, 90% of those stops were illegal, Martha, and that's the problem.
All right, I want to get the reaction from Gary McCarthy now, who's joining me. He was the police superintendent for 4 years there. Gary, you heard the conversation. What do you think?
I don't even know where to start. First of all, they're called Terry stops. And the Supreme Court in 1968 determined that the police can stop people based upon articulable, reasonable suspicion. That is the authority on whether or not we can stop people. It's not the ACLU. It's not the Department of Justice. The problem that we're having in Chicago and across the country is that the greatest challenge to policing today is that over the last 8 years, the ACLU and the Department of Justice have pretty much linked up together and determined that data-driven policing, in other words, CompStat, that started in New York in 1994, results in systemic racism, which is absurd. And you point out that it's preposterous to expect that in a 97% African-American community here in Chicago, Englewood, which is our most violent community, we're going to stop 32% white folks. The problem is we put officers at the places, at the times, and the locations where crime happens over and over again. We take police actions to prevent that next crime. Some of that are Terry stops. I could show you 2 years of data from Chicago from 2013 and 2014 that shows that our stops were almost precisely when, where, and who was committing crime. As a result, we had 5 decades worth of reduction, 1965 murder rates, which now are up by 100%. And the stops are down by 95%. There's an absolute correlation. DOJ has a lot to do with this.
What do you think about the fact that Bill Daley, who was chief of staff briefly for President Obama, says that he believes that stop and frisk may be what Chicago needs to do?
Well, I think that I agree with virtually everything he said. I can tell you this, though. This whole idea that there's a stop and frisk policy is not the case. Terry stops are tools that every police department in the country uses. You have to get out of the car to get the gun. You have to get out of the car to make an arrest. And that's what officers do. This whole thing has been spun out of control. It's been articulated improperly. And therefore, officers are on their heels and being hamstrung while criminals are being emboldened. People are dying as a result.
Got to do more to protect people in these neighborhoods and put them first. Because
Don't they
that's
deserve
the
that
first
protection?
priority. Absolutely. And that is the priority of the police in those neighborhoods as well. Thank you so much, Gary. Always good to see you.
My pleasure. Always great. Thank you.
Quick break. We'll be right back.